Welcome to Breast Cancer Action's webinar, Think Before You Pink, Exercise Your Mind. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Saru Kaiser, and I'm the Program Manager here at Breast Cancer Action. Joining me on the webinar today, we have three amazing presenters. The first is Samantha King. She's the Professor and Head of Gender Studies at Queen's University. The next is Alyssa Figueroa. She's the Campaigns Coordinator here at Breast Cancer Action. And the third is Jeanette Koncikowski, who's a Community Leader for Change with Breast Cancer Action. Before we get started, I just have a few quick announcements. The first is that Breast Cancer Action doesn't take money from any corporation that profits from or contributes to the breast cancer epidemic. Our work is largely supported by individual donors. Please consider making a $25 donation today to support work like these educational webinars. Our presentation of Think Before You Pink, Exercise Your Mind will last about 45 minutes. At any time during the webinar, you can ask a question by typing it into the question bar. We'll save time at the end to answer all the questions that we can. We want you to get involved with Breast Cancer Action, and this webinar is a great way to do that. Stay tuned for other ways we'll mention later on in the webinar. So I want to take a moment just to go through our agenda for today. Samantha King will start with an overview of the landscape of how these walks and runs developed, the role they play in the breast cancer movement, and some of the history and politics of fawns, and she'll tell you a little bit more about what that is. Alyssa will describe our current campaign and the questions we developed to help people look critically at walks and runs. She'll also talk a little bit about alternatives. And finally, Jeanette will describe her personal story of transformation and evolution from a participant in the walks and runs to her current role and identification as an activist and breast cancer action community leader. So I want to tell you a little bit about Breast Cancer Action. It was founded in 1990 by a group of women living with breast cancer who realized the power of community. They founded Breast Cancer Action because they saw a need for a grassroots organization with a unique understanding of the political, economic, and social context of breast cancer. Our founders, only one of whom is still alive today, knew that their private medical crises were part of a larger public health emergency, and that the experiences of those dealing with breast cancer needed to be heard to address the crises. We are the only organization that addresses the breast cancer epidemic at the intersection of breast cancer, the environment, social justice, and feminism. And our mission is to achieve health justice for all women at risk of and living with breast cancer. So we really understand and recognize how issues of health and social justice are intertwined through the work that we do. And we really feel it's a foundation for not only our core values, but around the way that we work towards ending the breast cancer epidemic. That's why we made a clear commitment to social justice as a foundation of all of our work, and I want to just talk you through a few pieces of that so you understand what it means to us. We know that breast cancer epidemic impacts communities unequally and leads to unacceptable differences in who develops breast cancer and when it develops, who gets high quality and timely treatment, and who dies from breast cancer. In order to address and end the breast cancer epidemic, we must tackle the root causes of these health inequities, which are often the result of a complex interplay of culture, power, economics, racism, and sexism. The third really is that we believe that there's no single injustice that can be effectively addressed in isolation. And we recognize that injustices in our society really reinforce each other in many different ways and at many different levels. And last but not least, in our work for health justice, we really strive to be an ally by using the power and privilege we hold as an organization to build solidarity with communities who currently or traditionally have had less access to power, information, and resources. As a watchdog for the breast cancer movement, we educate, organize, and take action for systemic change in three areas, and I'm just going to talk you through the three of them. The first is around our work on breast cancer screening, diagnosis, and treatment. And this area of our work examines the data from a patient perspective and includes breast cancer screening, healthcare access, drug and device approval, and really demands more effective, less costly, and less toxic treatments. Our work to address the root causes of the breast cancer epidemic focus on eliminating the involuntary exposures to hazardous and toxic chemicals present in all of our daily lives that put people at risk for breast cancer. And the last is around pink ribbon marketing and culture, which often exploits a disease that devastates communities, misrepresents who is affected by breast cancer, and excludes and marginalizes women's diverse lived experiences of the disease. We address the true impact that breast cancer has on women's lives and their communities. I'm going to introduce our speakers. Our first presenter, Samantha King, is professor and head of gender studies at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Her teaching and research focus on the cultural politics of health, sport, and the body. Her book, Pink Ribbons, Inc., Breast Cancer and the Politics of Philanthropy, is the basis of a documentary by the same name. Her current research focuses on the political ecology of protein. Our second presenter is Alyssa Figueroa. She works on developing and implementing breast cancer actions campaigns, including its award-winning Think Before You Pink campaign. She also works on expanding and engaging Breast Cancer Action's national membership. She comes to the organization as a longtime social justice advocate and independent journalist, including most recently as the activism editor at Alternet. She deeply respects Breast Cancer Action's fearless work in addressing the root causes of breast cancer and demanding health justice for all women. And our final presenter, Jeanette Koncikowski, is an educator, writer, activist mama, and gardener from Buffalo, New York. By day, she works as an instructional designer in the child welfare field. At night, she's working hard at single parenting 2 resilient little girls and a Shih Tzu. Jeanette's writing has been published over the years in many formats, from social justice curricula to gardening zines and feminist blogs. She currently focuses her activist work on environmental justice and community health education, especially related to breast cancer, to which she lost her mother in 2012, and epilepsy, to which she lost her partner in 2014. She joined Breast Cancer Action as a community leader in 2014. Welcome to all of our presenters, and I am now going to turn it over to our first presenter, Samantha King.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here and offer my contribution to Breast Cancer Action's webinar. So what I'm going to do today is offer a brief history of the Thon, and by Thons I mean physical activity-based fundraising events. Going to discuss how and why Thons changed and proliferated over time. We're going to discuss the Thon as neoliberalism. Then we'll move specifically to breast cancer walks and runs and look at some of the facts and figures around those events, some of the key features of breast cancer Thons, and the particular popularity compared with other fundraising events. And then finally, we'll look at the Thon as pinkwashing. And as many of you probably know, pinkwashing is claiming to care about breast cancer by promoting a product while also manufacturing or selling goods that are linked to the disease. And a recent example of pinkwashing is this pink fracking drill bit from Baker Hughes, and this was the protest meme that circulated on the internet widely after they partnered with the Komen Foundation to promote their cancer-causing industry. So when we notice a discomforting phenomenon, I think it's helpful to put on our historian hats and ask if it's always been this way and what we might learn from how it's changed. And the first physical activity-based fundraising events actually emerged in the 1950s in Europe in the spirit of post-war cooperation and were designed to address poverty and malnutrition primarily in the third world. They later spread to North America, and the Walk for Development was the US's first experience with these kinds of events. What was different about the Walk for Development, though, was that it used a donor choice format so that individual participants could choose where the money they raised went. And in fact, what that meant in this instance was that progressive social causes, such as the American Indian movement and national welfare rights, were among those that received these funds. So how did we go from this to this? How do we move from a more radical approach to what we are familiar with today? And how and why did funds change and proliferate? And that's a complicated question with a lot of possible answers, but I'm going to focus on just 3 today. And the first of these is what scholars in my field call the fitness boom of the 1980s, where millions of Americans took to running and jogging and walking and going to the gym and aerobics and all of those fun things in a very quick way, and there was an intense change towards these kinds of physical activities. And what people have shown in their research is that this is really linked to the politics of the Reagan era and this idea that health should be an individual responsibility. And so in that context, participation in physical activity came to constitute a sign of good citizenship. And at the same time, those who weren't able to look after themselves or take care of their health within the capitalist healthcare and welfare system were demonized. Interestingly, this focus on individual responsibility extended to philanthropy, which came to be seen as preferable to collective approaches to addressing social and biomedical issues. And then at the same time, and here we're talking about the 1980s through to the 1990s, we see the professionalization and corporatization of fundraising events and the nonprofit sector more broadly. So nonprofit managers increasingly came to have to hold business degrees. The events management industry exploded. Fundraising became branded, highly produced entertainment with a focus on markets, growth, and competition. And in some ways, and as I shall illustrate later, causes became somewhat incidental in this model. And so one way of saying that is that self-responsibility for health and fitness, coupled with a renewed emphasis on charitable giving, position funds as the quintessential neoliberal tool. Now, neoliberalism sounds like academic jargon, and in some senses it is, but I actually think it's also a really important and helpful concept. And just as I was preparing for this webinar, I came across an article, actually a column by George Monbiot in The Guardian, titled Neoliberalism, the Ideology at the Root of All Our Problems. And he writes, the column opens with the following words: "Imagine if the people of the Soviet Union had never heard of communism. The ideology that dominates our lives has, for most of us, no name. Mention it in conversation and you will be rewarded with a shrug. Even if your listeners have heard the term before, they will struggle to define it. Neoliberalism, do you know what it is?" And he goes on to say that neoliberalism played a role in the financial meltdown of 2007 and 8. It's underpinning the revelations in the Panama Papers. It helped with the collapse of the ecosystem, the rise of Donald Trump, a whole bunch of really terrible changes that have occurred over the past few years. And I would include the shift that we see in our approach to fundraising and to disease in general as part of the rise of neoliberalism. So when I use that term, I use it to refer to a political and economic ideology and a set of policies and practices that encourages individual responsibility and entrepreneurship in the context of privatization, cuts in public spending, free trade, and deregulation of industry. And what this has meant is a dramatic upward redistribution of resources worldwide, from the poor to the rich. And I see thorns, and breast cancer thorns specifically, as providing a kind of ethical rationale for neoliberalism, where individual and corporate responsibility are encouraged and celebrated to the exclusion of other ways of thinking about how we might address this disease. So moving specifically to walks and runs in the breast cancer movement, we can say that they proliferated in the 1990s. Two of the most prominent US events, and the largest in fact, are the Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure and the Avon 39, the Walk to End Breast Cancer. The Race for the Cure, as an example of how these events have grown and changed over time, began in 1983 with just 700 participants, but by 2005 had 1.4 million participants in approximately 99 cities in the US. And today there are 150 races in 4 continents with 1 million people. And that shift, I think, reflects the fact that they're actually not doing as well in the US market and have taken the model overseas as a way to boost participation. In comparison with other causes, we can see that of the top 10 large nonprofit fundraising events held in the US in 2014, 6 were devoted to cancer, and 2 of those 6 were specifically for breast cancer, and the 2 events that I mentioned. I think we can explain the popularity of breast cancer-thons in a number of ways, but in general, I would say that breast cancer has been fabricated over the past 30 years as a non-threatening and personally beatable disease. And that's happened through a number of routes. One is the pinkification of the disease and the use of a non-threatening, feminine, fun color to signify the disease. Destigmatization is a good thing, and in part came about as a result of women's health activism and also the spread of screening into asymptomatic populations. On the downside, though, I think the overly optimistic ideology of the mainstream breast cancer movement and this focus on self-responsibility for health and for getting screened has helped promote this idea that it's beatable, and we are, in fact, as a culture, beating it. And I don't like those terms, but it's hard to get away from them. And then, of course, there's just the fact that the breast is this highly valued cultural symbol, both of a symbol of motherhood and of sexuality, which in some senses makes the disease more marketable. And unfortunately, that is the way that producers of these kinds of big events think about their causes. So what are some of the key features of breast cancer-thons? They tend to be centrally and carefully orchestrated and branded with high-profile sponsors, mountains of free stuff, upbeat music, celebrity appearances, educational booths, and there are also some standard rituals: survivor parades and receptions, inspirational speeches, and memorialization. Interestingly, even though there is some memorialization, it tends to be a fairly muted part of these events, so that there's also a denial of suffering and death. At least in the events where I've conducted my research, it's possible to attend and not realize that there's such a thing as stage 4 breast cancer, or that people still die in large numbers from the disease. They tend to prioritize cure over prevention. They're depoliticizing insofar as they don't encourage people to band together and challenge the status quo. They tend to be high overhead in their costs, and they give low returns. And they've transformed into a fundraising market in and of themselves, and in the process squeezed out smaller efforts. And so to conclude my part of the presentation, I just want to tell a little story about a series of transactions that occurred over the last 15 years in the terrain of breast cancer special events to illustrate how pinkwashing has unfolded in this instance. So in May 2002, following criticism from activist organizations such as Breast Cancer Action, who were unhappy with the high overhead cost and low returns of the Avon Breast Cancer 3-Day, which is the previous iteration of their current event, and these were a series of walks staged on behalf of Avon by a company called Pelota. Avon announced that it was abandoning its fundraising vehicle. So Breast Cancer Action and some other organizations were critical. So Avon said that it was going to abandon the 3-Day. And then soon after that, they revealed that they would host their own series of thons, perhaps with a different organizer, not Pelota, and Pelota declared bankruptcy. But this sequence of events marked the end of Pelota in name only. A few months later, the Komen for the Cure Foundation began circulating advertisements for a 3-day walk that looked remarkably similar to the publicity that Avon once used for its events. Indeed, the logo was practically identical, and you can see that in this slide. The Komen Foundation, it turns out, had bought Pelota's assets and hired former employees to produce its new venture, which it would now run in addition to its Race for the Cure, a 1-day run. And then in 2003, former Pelota employees took the formula to Canada, where they established the weekend to end breast cancer. So I think what this series of transactions tells us is how thongs have become highly valued commodities in themselves and the subject of intense competition among a network of professional fundraisers who work across the corporate and nonprofit sectors, and whose main identification is not with a particular cause they are working to fund, but with the brand recognition through which they might enhance participation numbers in their thon. And so the money in some ways even becomes tangential to the model, with the focus instead on producing an experience for consumer fundraisers that will keep them coming back, securing for the event its foothold in the marketplace for what are ultimately inefficient, low-return products, more effective at building name recognition for nonprofits and corporations than raising funds. So I'm going to end there and pass the hat to Alyssa for her presentation.
Thank you so much. Right. Great. So 2 weeks ago, we released a new educational resource titled Questions to Ask Before You Walk for Breast Cancer. So I want to first go over how we decided to create this resource, how we got here. So we've been listening and responding to women's concerns around breast cancer walks since we launched our Think Twice Before You Walk campaign in 2000. And that was in response to an Avon walk, which we found that only 64% of the total money raised went to breast cancer organizations, and the rest had gone throwing the walk itself. So we called on them to spend less money putting on the walk itself and give more money to effective breast cancer programs. So back then, we were really focused on following the money. And today, recently, we expanded our thinking around pink ribbon culture to look beyond just following the money. And we wanted to use that new thinking to update our work around breast cancer walks. So these questions that we came up with, they can apply to any walk, but we were really looking more closely at the large-scale walks where there's so much at stake, where you have multi-million-dollar breast cancer charities teaming up with multi-billion-dollar corporations. And so we looked at the Avon Foundation, which puts on their Avon 39 2-day walks in 7 cities across the U.S. each year. We looked at Susan G. Komen, which puts on 3-day walks in 7 cities across the U.S. annually as well, but it also puts on a Race for the Cure series, which includes over 150 walks across the country and even some internationally. And we also looked at the American Cancer Society, which puts on their Making Strides Against Breast Cancer walks also in hundreds of cities throughout the nation. So our vision for this resource is, our goal is not to put an end to walks and runs for breast cancer. We really believe that these walks could transform into events that truly address and supports all women with breast cancer and works to save lives. We want transparency. We want to know what's happening with the money, and we also want accountability. We want the walks to work for women affected by breast cancer. So going through the questions, question number 1 is how much money raised from the walk will go to breast cancer programs? So you can see on the websites of big breast cancer charities that they do put some financial figures on there, but they really don't have much context. So Avon reports that it's raised $550 million since 2003. Komen reports that it's raised $800 million since 2003. But that doesn't really answer 3 basic questions that you should be able to answer. How much money was raised by the walk this year? How much money went to breast cancer programs from that money? And how much went elsewhere, such as putting on the walk itself? Today, the cost of putting on some of these walks, especially multi-day walks, 2-day or 3-day walks, can be pretty extravagant. So we looked into Avon's walk, and we looked into all of them, and we couldn't find much on the others because they don't publicly list it. But we did a few hours of research into Avon, and we were able to pull together and add up from their press releases how much they raised last year, which was $34 million from their 2-day walks in 2015, but only gave $18 million, about $18 million to breast cancer organizations. So that means 47% of the money is publicly unaccounted for. Some of that could have gone to putting on the walks themselves, but we don't know. And even if we did find out what percentage of the money was going to breast cancer programs, it's still important to ask which programs are being funded. So the big breast cancer charities can be very misleading about what the money raised is funding. So I see it as there are 2 different ways these charities can mislead the public. The first way is by just explicitly misleading them. Susan G. Komen's Race for the Cure walk is a prime example of this. The Race for the Cure, the very name of that suggests that the money raised will go to research. But if you look on their website, it says that only 25% of the money raised from the walk does go to research. And then Komen is also a culprit of the other way charities mislead, which is a more subtle, hidden way. So Komen markets their walks by suggesting that the money goes to breast cancer programs that save lives. They save women's lives. If you walk for Race for the Cure, you're raising money that will save women's lives. And the money will go to programs such as early detection programs which save women's lives and raising awareness. But in reality, we know that early detection programs have actually been ineffective in saving lives, in decreasing the breast cancer mortality rate. And in terms of raising awareness, that also does nothing for women affected by the disease. And society today is more aware than ever of breast cancer. So meanwhile, there are many other breast cancer programs that remain severely underfunded. And 2 examples of this is research into metastatic breast cancer, which is an incurable type of breast cancer. And so research into that could mean fewer women die of the disease, and research into environmental links to cancer as well could mean fewer women get diagnosed with the disease in the first place. And this, the latter ties into question number 3, which is, do the walk sponsors increase women's risk of breast cancer? So all the big breast cancer charities allow corporations to contribute money to putting on their walks, even if the corporation makes a product linked to breast cancer. So we see Komen take money from Ford to throw the race for the cure, and the American Cancer Society takes money from Chevrolet. So they're making strides against breast cancer walk, even though there are links between auto exhaust and breast cancer. And perhaps the most hypocritical charity is the Avon Foundation, which is completely financially backed by Avon Products, it's the multi-billion-dollar cosmetics corporation. And that corporation, it's been targeted a lot by activists throughout the years because it uses chemicals in its makeup that are not only linked to increasing breast cancer risk, but they can also interfere with breast cancer treatment. And so Avon, because the foundation is named right after the corporation gets all this great PR through the walk, and it makes products that contribute to the disease. So question 4 is a kind of a culture piece to these questions. Does the walk present a one-sided picture of breast cancer that leaves some women out? So the big breast cancer charities say they are putting on a walk for women with breast cancer, but they portray the disease in an inaccurate way that leaves many women, especially women dying from the disease, feeling left out. And our next speaker will go more into this, but I just put 2 quotes up here from the websites of Avon and the American Cancer Society, and they use people's stories to promote their walk. But these stories and other marketing materials on their site basically suggest that if you get your yearly mammogram, if you hope enough, and if you fight hard enough, you can beat breast cancer. And not only is that inaccurate, but it's extremely hurtful to women dying of breast cancer through no fault of their own. But the good thing is there are alternatives to breast cancer walks. And so the first one, these are just 3 of the suggestions we have. And the first one we have here, remember we're not trying to put a stop to these walks, but we think these breast cancer charities need to do better. And so we encourage people who also want answers like we do to contact the breast cancer charity you're considering contributing to and get answers. And if you don't like their answers, demand change. You can also volunteer for or give directly to a breast cancer organization that is doing work you think is important. And if you want an alternative that still kind of creates a sense of community like the walks do for some people, we suggest hosting a screening of the documentary Pink Ribbons, Inc. with your friends and family to learn more about the history and politics of the breast cancer movement. And as the campaigns coordinator here at Breast Cancer Action, I wanted to give you an overview of ways you can get involved with our current work here. So we can help you host that Pink Ribbons Inc. screening. We are also asking people to share their story about breast cancer walks to help people think critically about these events. You can also become a community leader, and these are members who want to get more involved in working to end the breast cancer epidemic in their communities. If you live in California, you could become a California Cancer for Activists, who are members living in the state who want to become more involved in our work to ban fracking in California because of its links to breast cancer. You can also participate in the March for Clean Energy Revolution happening this July in Philadelphia, where we'll be rallying to call for a national fracking ban. You can take action on our current campaigns, which you could find if you click on the Take Action tab on our website. And if you're interested in fundraising, you can sign up to be a Hellraiser for Health to fundraise in your community, or you can create a Don't Pink for Me page in which people could donate to Breast Cancer Action on your behalf. All of this you can find on our website, beastaction.org. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jeanette for her presentation on her personal experience walking for breast cancer.
Thank you, Alyssa. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I'd like to thank Saru and Alyssa for inviting me to tell you the story of my change of heart and mind with my breast cancer activism. I can't tell you this story without telling you about my family, which is how I came to be involved with breast cancer walks almost 20 years ago now. When I was in college, my godmother, Bunny, who was my mother's youngest sister, was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was stage 2B, and she was only 36 years old. When I called the American Cancer Society on her behalf to get some resources, I learned of their making strides to end breast cancer walk that would be happening later in the year on my campus. So the women in my family attended that Making Strides walk in October 1998. This was one of the earliest local walks for breast cancer. It was fairly small, and there was not much in the way of vendors or sponsors, corporations. The focus was really on building community for women with breast cancer. We also walked the following year in 1999. While I'm going to focus today on the Making Strides walk from American Cancer Society, we did also sometimes participate in other thons, such as the Komen Run and the Relay for Life. In May of 2000, my mother, Rosemary, was also diagnosed with breast cancer. Her breast cancer was more aggressive than my aunt's, which was a stage 3B. We were told Mom would have about a 30% chance of survival. Between 2001 and 2002, both my mom and Bunny were tested for the BRCA gene mutation. The test was negative for both of them. Making Strides took on even more importance now to both of the sisters. By the summer of 2002, my mother was in remission, just in time for my wedding. Right around then, we found out that Bunny's cancer had returned and spread pretty quickly. She was diagnosed in the summer and gone by the end of January 2003. That following October would be my family's 5th year doing Making Strides and fundraising for the American Cancer Society. It was the first one without my Aunt Bunny. After Bunny's death, my mom channeled her grief into the walk, as it came to be known in my family. More people joined the team, which was named Bunny's Angels at that point, to remember my aunt, including the men and children in our family and many of Bunny's friends and coworkers. As a whole, the event seemed to be growing too. Around this point in time, it was moved downtown, and it was put near City Hall in the marina. By 2006, there were so many angels that my mother decided we should feed them breakfast to thank them for their time and donations. Because breakfast requires one to make a few comments, my mother had to speak about my aunt, and although she did not like to be the center of attention, she spoke at the breakfast that year of my aunt's beauty and strength and her enduring sense of humor. Later on, we found out that the angels raised over $5,000 that year. When we arrived downtown, chock full of coffee and carbs, the event seems to have grown by leaps yet again. The survivors were now donned with pink sashes or flower leis. An MC would lead part of the crowd in warm-up exercises. Sororities and fraternities came out in full force in their Save the Tatas or Keep Second Base t-shirts. Ford Motor Company and its pink Mustang led the parade. Thousands of people seemed to be walking. The mood had become very celebratory, very corporate, and very femme, as if we were tailgating for a football game between princesses and ballerinas, and not there because of a shared health crisis. In 2007, my mom was again diagnosed with breast cancer. This one was a second form. It was not a reoccurrence of the first. This one was stage 1, but in the same breast. She underwent a mastectomy and more chemotherapy. She immediately tried for reconstruction, and it failed, threatening her life. And then she tried again 18 months later at reconstruction, again another infection. All of this took quite a toll on her body and her spirit. But my mother was not stopped. She brought in a number of other women with breast cancer and their families to join the walk team. At this point, by 2007 and 2008, the team became one of the larger fundraisers for our local ACS chapter. The breakfast got bigger and bigger as the team grew. So big, in fact, it outgrew my parents' house, and so we moved into the city's Irish Center. At some point, the walk organizers learned of my mother's story. She was enlisted to go on the radio to speak about fundraising in order to find a cure for breast cancer. Then they solicited her participation in a morning television show. Because of her growing advocacy work, she found she was more comfortable speaking in front of the breakfast crowd every year. She started putting up educational material and talking to women wherever she went about breast cancer and what they could do to prevent it. Making Strides helped her find her voice, and for that I am ever grateful. In 2009, I was finally awakened to a much stronger environmental consciousness, thanks to witnessing what my mother was going through, as well as my experience with another pregnancy and natural childbirth. It was actually midwifery that brought me to health justice work. While I still participated in Making Strides to support my mother, I began to feel more disillusioned with the direction the walk was moving. Then in February 2010, we found out the pain that was in her arm that my mother had been having, to which her doctors originally chalked up to lymphedema, was actually a recurrence of the first disease. She had metastatic disease at this point, and it had spread everywhere. Her spine, her liver, even her brain. She was given 6 months to a year to live. My mother remained determined to live to see the walk that year, to live to see her first grandson born, due at the end of the year. However, we talked her out of the breakfast. Ever the steadfast advocate, my mother insisted on being at the walk finish line that October. But I did not want to be there. I despaired at the grown women prancing around in tutus and pink wigs. As the group Hope Cheer began, I tried not to look towards the tent where my mom would have gone previously to claim her survivor sash. There had been no request for playing spokeswoman this year. It became obvious to me that Mom, with stage 4 cancer, didn't belong there anymore. Because there is no special tent, no sash given to the dying women. No "I'm sorry we failed you" chant. I understood then in that moment that the dying were not welcome at the walk when you were trying to sell a cure that they'll never see. I cried the whole way home that day, all the way out of our city, next to our polluted Great Lakes, all the way up to the steel plant at the end of my street. It's fenced, dabbled with brownfield cleanup signs every couple of 100 yards. Bethlehem Steel is one of 4 Class 2 Superfund sites in our county, meaning it currently poses a hazard to human health and the environment. It is one of nearly 800 hazardous waste sites in western New York. In that moment, it was as if I could feel the neurons in my brain finally making the connection. I had believed that the walk would utilize the thousands of dollars our team contributed, among the millions raised annually, to provide research, treatment, and care for women like my mother and my aunt. The American Cancer Society did provide them with free resources like chemo coaches and wigs. But as the largest cancer advocacy organization in the nation, were they actively working to prevent carcinogens in our environment? I'd never seen anything suggesting as much at the walk. My mother and my aunt were working-class women who typed in the offices of machine shops, fertilizer companies, and factories. Neither sister had the breast cancer gene. What they did carry in their bodies, though, is the toxic legacy of a Rust Belt city in one of the most polluted counties in America. My mother, Rosemary Redkmuth, died at dawn on Sunday, July 1st, 2012. I've never participated in another breast cancer walk. For the first year or two, the angels continued on without me, and later without my father and my brothers. I found another way to honor my mother and continue her legacy thanks to Breast Cancer Action. In 2014, I became a community leader with them, and I have found a purpose for my own grief now. 2 days after I started a local Facebook group on behalf of Breast Cancer Action, I heard from leaders at my local American Cancer Society who wanted to know what my agenda was. After questioning them about whether they were engaging on work related to environmental health and justice, which they weren't, I assured them that my agenda would be very different from their own. It was the activist Audre Lorde who wrote this quote in the Cancer Journals, which detailed her own thoughts about living with breast cancer. While rereading it the other day, I realized how important the context for this oft-cited quote is. Our silence will not protect us, but I believe that solidarity with our sisters and with Mother Earth will. Thank you, and now I'm going to turn it back over to Saru for question and answer.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. And before we get started with the Q&A, I have a few more pieces of information I want to share. I want to just highlight a couple of the things that were mentioned through the presentation. The first is both our thinkbeforeyouPink.org website or also our bcaction.org website, where you can find out more about our current campaign, about the 4 questions that Alyssa walked through. You can also learn more about these issues that we've been talking about in the book Pink Ribbons, Inc., or the documentary by the same name. And last, if you're interested in getting more involved with Breast Cancer Action, again, you can consider joining the Community Leaders for Change, of which Jeanette is one of. And there's more information about the program on our website. If you click the Take Action tab on the right-hand side, you can find out more information. And now I just want to walk through a few ways that you can get involved generally with Breast Cancer Action. You can sign up to get our news and action alert emails and keep up to date on all the issues that we work on. You can join us on Facebook and Twitter and connect with others and just help start it to change the conversation about how we end and address the breast cancer epidemic. You can also help others get involved. You can tell your friends, coworkers, and family about this webinar. And you can also donate to support our education and advocacy work. Again, like I said, Breast Cancer Action really relies on your support to make these webinars possible. Your individual support is so crucial, and if you've been inspired and would like to make a donation, the website is on the screen. It's bcaction.org/donate. I want to give a really big thank you to all of our presenters, Samantha, Alyssa, and Jeanette, and I want to open it up to your questions. We have a little more than 10 minutes to answer those questions. Again, we have some questions people have typed in, but if you click on your question bar and click write your question in, we will be able to answer it before time is up. So the first question, Alyssa, I think is to you. Someone asked, how does this campaign that you talked about as part of the Think Before You Pink campaign, how does this relate to the work that Breast Cancer Action does in October around Think Before You Pink?
Great, thank you, Sue. So the work we do in October, October is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So we do a campaign, Think Before You Pink campaign, every October when, you know, it's in the news. Many people are talking about breast cancer, and we do a campaign that talks about pink washing, that talks about other issues with pink ribbon culture. And so this campaign, we're just expanding that, and we're, you know, pink ribbon issues with pink ribbons and pink ribbon culture happens year-round. A lot of focus is on October, but it happens year-round, and these walks and runs are actually start right now. They start pretty much in the spring, especially the multi-day walks. Avon's 2-day walk series just kicked off on April 23rd, this past Saturday, in Houston, and that series will go until October. Komen will kick off their 3-day walk soon. So, and then the other smaller walks happen throughout the year, but the big multi-day walks really start now, and so these issues, you know, with pink ribbon culture you can see throughout the year, and so we're just expanding kind of our analysis and watchdog lens throughout the year. But it's for the same campaign, and just looking outside October, the same issues.
Thank you, Alyssa. There's a question, Samantha King, that someone says, why do you think this sort of phenomena of the SONs has sort of blown up with breast cancer versus other diseases?
Well, I think as I said, there are some factors that are particular to breast cancer that have made it more appealing, maybe than other causes, but that wasn't the case. 30 or 40 years ago, it would have been unimaginable that breast cancer would be the favorite charitable cause. And so the process of destigmatizing the disease, which is a good thing. I mean, people should be able to talk about it and be public about it if they want to, and for it to be in public discourse, I think, is a really important thing. But the problem has been that the particular way we've come able to talk about that has been through this, through the pinkification of the disease, and really through making invisible the kind of suffering that people experience, and the fact that we're not actually making progress in the way that these special events suggest we might be. So I mean, I think that's what happened, and marketers found a way to paint breast cancer as something honestly fun and perky and optimistic, and it's kind of shocking to say that, but I think that that's what happened.
Great, thank you. Jeanette, there's a question for you. Just if you could talk a little bit about how your feelings about walks and runs have changed since the time that you participated in them to now.
Sure. So for me, when we started in the beginning, I very much saw making strides in the other walks as kind of feminist activism. I was a women's studies major in college, which was right at the time my aunt and my mother were diagnosed, and so I saw this as sisterhood. I thought this was something that we were doing that would actually help women like my mother and my aunt. And because we participated for 13 years, I was witness to that change, that shift that Samantha talked about, with moving, kind of from a community focus to a corporate focus. And as the team grew, the walks grew, or maybe as the walks grew, our teams grew. I don't know if that happened coincidentally or not, but I really became disillusioned the more corporate it became. In the article that I wrote that's up on BC Action's blog, I talk a little bit more about those feelings, but it was really kind of in witnessing that shift to this corporate cause marketing focus and not about the community of women that changed my feeling. I continued to participate because it was important to my mother, but I kind of became disillusioned about halfway through our participation in them. And then it was really watching the marginalization of my mother, both as a woman dying from breast cancer with metastatic disease, and also with seeing the marginalization as an advocate that all of a sudden the request to go on and be their kind of proud survivor dried up when she got sick and was actively dying. That kind of put the end of it for me, and my family was very supportive when I stopped walking, my immediate family. But a lot of the team members were shocked. There was an expectation that as her daughter, I was going to carry on the breakfast, that I was going to carry on the team efforts, and I just wanted no part of it, because for me it was very much feeling like the same people that came to her funeral would be walking again in October. I emotionally was not, that's not where I was anymore, and so I stopped and kind of just dealt with the fallout, and I think a lot of people on the team now, have been very supportive of finally understanding why it changed for me. And the more I've been able to speak out through Breast Cancer Action and talk about these changes, the more it made sense to them.
Great, thank you. There's a question maybe to everyone on the panel, if they have thoughts on this, that someone says, do you think that it's really possible to get breast cancer organizations to change their mantra and focus more on funding research into the specific research that you've talked about on this webinar today?
This is Alyssa. I think it's possible that I think with pressure, with activism, we can get these breast cancer charities to change their ways. They are, even if they don't act like they're accountable to women, but they rely on public support and women and their members. And so if we can educate people about what's going on and organize them and you know, and they take action, I do believe it's possible.
This is Jeanette. I agree with everything Alyssa just said. For me, part of why I joined Breast Cancer Action was because I saw that they, as an organization, were incredibly effective taking on other, big nonprofits and corporations to compel them to make changes about cause marketing and their responsibility for pink washing and things like that. And so I absolutely believe that with education and with some pressure, we can make these kinds of changes at these events.
Great, thank you. There's a number of questions that have to do with specifically getting this webinar after it airs. So I just want to let everyone know that we record all of our webinars and we make them available on our website. It's usually about a week after they air. And they also, for everyone who has registered for the webinar, a link will be sent to our website where they can watch the webinar again. So this is a place where if you would like to let your friends or your community know about the webinar, even if they missed it, they can still have a chance to see it and watch it. So thank you for all of those questions. Look through. I think we addressed all the questions. So I just want to take this moment to close and thank everyone again for all your thoughtful questions and comments. And if we didn't get a chance to answer a question because it didn't come to you in time, if you think of it, you are welcome to follow up with us at info@bcaction.org. Again, thank you so much for attending. And please watch your email. We ask people to fill out a short survey where you can provide feedback on this webinar and help us make our webinars more successful in the future. So again, thank you to our presenters. Thank you to everyone on the call today. Please have a wonderful rest of your day or evening.